Well, we finally made it to the book of Revelation, Ken.
Yes, sir.
And I know a lot of people are excited about it. I'm excited about it. And why don't you kind of tell us why it's important that we start this series off with some historical stuff first before we actually get into most of the scripture?
Yeah, I mean, the reason we're going to have to start here, Jimmy, is because it's been popularized that Revelation has been written, well, what we call the late date. There are basically two options on this study. One is known as the early date, which I'm going to advocate for that in this video, which is usually said to be AD 65. And then the late date is usually said to be AD 95. So you've got these two options of 65 or 95. And of course, as we've been studying through the book of Matthew, what we're saying, our contention is that Matthew 24, at least up until verse 35 for sure, is about the destruction of Jerusalem through the judgment of the Lord, using as his punishing rod the Roman Empire. And so it's important that we correctly date the book of Revelation, because I believe in what we're going to teach through verse by verse, word by word, and show in great detail through the next course of however long it takes us to go through the book, is that Revelation is a continuation of the same information on Matthew 24. It is the covenant lawsuit, as we've stated before, of the Lord ending the old covenant and punishing apostate Jews, destroying the temple, and this beginning of a new covenant post temple. And
And
so we're going to be,
and it makes sense too if you think about it that way, because John didn't even mention the Olivet Discourse in the book of John.
right?
And
Yep.
so it's like he has his own extended version of his Matthew 24.
That's what I believe. It makes sense. And we refer to, Matthew, Mark, and Luke as the synoptic gospels. You heard when you hear synoptic, you hear that the beginning of that as sin, that means same. And then of course our word optic, meaning eyes. And this just means that Matthew, Mark, and Luke look the same. And so Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have what we call the Olivet Discourse. And John doesn't have it, which is interesting. But he's the same author, as you just said, of the book of Revelation. And so it has been commonly stated that his version of the Olivet Discourse is a much larger version, and it's done in signs instead. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. It's done in signs instead of a straightforward dialogue like Jesus did on the Sermon on the Mount. John gave it in fantastical language that we refer to as prophetic language. It's the way the prophets spoke in the Old Testament, as we can read.
Well, and wasn't he quoting most of those old prophets?
Yes,
Basically.
Revelation. I heard it said this way one time, and I can't improve on it. Revelation is the exclamation point on a sentence which has already been written. And Revelation is considered the most biblical book in the Bible, and that is because it quotes or alludes to the Bible on average 2 times every verse. It's astonishing. When I say this, folks they can never wrap their head around this, but I will show this and display this as we go through. There is no new information in the book of Revelation. None. There's no new information that's only introduced in Revelation. It's all a reference to something else we've already written. If folks are familiar with the idea of a hyperlink, when you go to a web page and there's a highlighted word, usually a key word, if you go on something and you click on that, it usually brings you to another page. Think of Revelation as a jam-packed series of hyperlinks. And to understand it, all you have to do is click on it and go read the passage in the Old Testament. That's how we're going to study it. That's when we refer to as biblical theology in our very first video we ever did, having the 10 rules of interpretation. Understand what the author's intention was, what he meant when he wrote it. So we're going to get into all of that. But in this particular video here, we're going to look at the two options for the writing. As you can tell, it would be pretty devastating to our case if the late date was correct. If Revelation was indeed written in AD 95, then it very well can't be prophecy about something that took place from 66 to 70 AD. So that would be devastating to our case. Now, if you're a futurist, if you're a dispensationalist, or if you think Revelation is mostly about our future, then you really don't have a dog in the fight, whether it's AD 65 or AD 95. Your position is fine either way. But it's very important for our position that it is an early date. So we're going to spend some time on this, because I think and irresponsibly so. I think that many teachers just simply say, as we all know, Revelation was written in AD 95, and they don't give any reasoning for that. They just say it as if it's fact. And we're going to go over in this video why that's an irresponsible statement. And we're also going to look at two forms of evidence. Internal evidence, that is evidence from inside the Bible itself. That is the actual words on the page, internal to the book. And external evidence, that is things that happen outside of the book. I don't mean history, but I'm talking about what people say about the book. That would be considered external evidence. I think as a follower of Christ, as a Bible believer, we should be more concerned about with what the Bible says itself than with what people say about the Bible. So we should value internal evidence far more than external evidence. In other words, if there's a quote by somebody, which is what we're going to go over today, if there's a quote by somebody and they state something about the Bible, that doesn't overturn the internal evidence of what the Bible says itself. You know, if the Bible tells us that our sins are forgiven, and I find a quote from an early church father that say Jesus can't take away sins, what's my authority? What do I go with? Well, the internal evidence, I go with what the Bible states and not with what somebody said about the text. So that's internal versus external. So in this video, Jimmy, if it's okay, I'm just going to jump in.
Let's go.
We're going to look right here, 5 internal evidences for Revelation being written in AD 65. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just make my case, and I have it on 5 pillars. I think usually if you're trying to argue for something and you have 2 good proofs of it, that's pretty good. 3 is considered an unbroken cord. I'm going to give 5 in this video of what I would consider are irrefutable. If somebody wants to say that these are incorrect, what I would ask you to do, please, if you're watching this video and you'd say that I believe in the late date, this is garbage, I would say, please don't embarrass yourself and just say, I disagree. Please take the time to take my 5 reasons for this, and please show how these are each one. Knock them off one at a time. If I've got bad reasons, that should be fairly easy to do. First of all, I would just say the first evidence, internal evidence for the early date or the AD 65 date is grammatical. Let me just say these real quick and then we'll talk about them. So the grammatical, that is just basically the words that I'm finding in the text. The actual words in the text is just me reading, having the ability to read and comprehend the plain meaning of the text. Sometimes we say, I would say number 1 is grammatical. Canonical, you hear the word canon in there. In other words, does my view of the early date fit all of what the Bible is saying? Does this fit in the entire biblical story, the narrative? Would it be an oddball if Revelation was about our future? Does it match everything else everybody's saying? Do the phrases that are taken from Revelation from other places like the Gospels, are they the same context, or are we making it a different context? Does it match the rest of the Bible? Canonical. Architectural reasons. We're going to look at a building that was standing that we know when it was destroyed. So it's very important. Architectural. Sociological. We're going to look at the relationship between the apostate Jews, the ungodly Jews out of covenant, and the Christians. And so we have 2 groups of people that are interacting with each other, and we can make a prediction what their relationship would be prior to the destruction of the temple and after the destruction of the temple. We're going to cross-reference that with our list of Roman emperors here in a moment. And lastly, we have historical data. Does the actual internal evidence match what we know happened in history? There's things we really don't have to guess about. We know the temple was destroyed in AD 70. We're going to look and see. There's other things like the number of the mark of the beast is another one we're going to look at. And does this match the historical data? So we're going to look at these. Let's go right in order here. So the very first reason is grammatical. And for the grammatical evidence, I'm going to look at the plain language used in the book of Revelation. And Jimmy, let's go ahead and turn, if we would, to Revelation 1, verses 1 through 4. I'm just going to kind of write these up here as we go to keep track. 1 through 4. We're also going to look at 7 through 9 in this. And then also let's look at Revelation 22 when we get done with that in verses 6 through 10. So let's go ahead and turn to chapter 1 to get started. Couple of things. First of all, this is how the book starts. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him. So we have the Father giving it to the Son. And the purpose was to show unto his servants, that is Christ's servants, things which must shortly come to pass. So first of all, we have our plain language here. This is talking about information about things that must shortly come to pass. So the plain language, the grammatical language is that when this was received, these things are about to happen. And we can take the time, and in fact, we will take the time. I'm not going to skip over any of this. I'm not shortcutting any of this. When we do Revelation 1, perhaps in our next video, or whenever we do Revelation 1, I'll take the time to really explain each and every word. This video is not that, but I will just say that that phrase must shortly come to pass or quickly take place. We can look at the other ways that's used in the Bible. It's things like the Lord telling Peter to arise quickly and get out somewhere. And people have said, well, that shortly come to pass or must happen quickly or something like that. That's the Greek word entakos. And they will say, well, that just simply means that it cannot happen for a long time, but when it does, it happens quickly. And that doesn't match the rest of the way we see the word being used. In fact, there's a totally different Greek word, chronos, that actually does mean that. But it doesn't make any sense in context to be able to say to Peter, Peter, I know your shackles just got freed from you. I know that you're in prison. I want you to sit there as long as you want. You can sit there for 5 days or 2 weeks in prison. I know the prison doors are open. You can sit there as long as you want. But buddy, when you do stand up, you better stand up as fast as you can. That doesn't make any sense at all. What he's saying is stand up right now. Let's go. Plain language, grammatical reasons. Let's read on. The next part B of verse 1 says this, and he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John. We'll get into this more when we're doing our actual study, but I just point out real quickly, we not only have the time period given in verse 1, we also have the mode that it's transcribed in verse 1 or the transmission of this, and it says that it is signified. And if folks would just look at the first 4 letters of that, it'll give you a huge insight onto how Revelation is written. It's written through signs. And in fact, this word signified is used by John in his gospel, and Jesus is speaking about, and this he signified by which manner of death he would do. And so that word signified tells you how we're writing this thing. Once the vision starts in chapter 4, it is through signs, and the signs mean something. Verse 2, who bear record of the word of God and of the testimony of Jesus Christ of all the things that he saw. Blessed is he that readeth and that hear the words of this prophecy and keep those things which are written therein. For, here's another timestamp, for the time is at hand. So at the moment of this writing, all these things were about to happen. They're within an arm's length. They're at hand. Arm's length means you can reach out and grab it. Verse number 4. John to the 7 churches which are in Asia, that is the Roman-controlled province of Asia at the time, not the continent. Grace be unto you and peace from him which is and which was and which is to come, from the 7 spirits which are before his throne. We'll get into the spirits and all that later when we do the verse by verse. For now, for our purposes of this video, I just want to point out that these 7 churches, if you read it very carefully in verse 1, it says, which are, that's a present tense verb, are in Asia. In other words, they were in Asia the moment that this was being written.
Yeah, they're not
the Roman
there now.
controlled province. Yeah, this area is what we would call Turkey at this time. It wasn't called that. And so this book we have in the first 4 verses. If you ask me, Ken, how do you know the book of Ephesians is written to the church of Ephesus? Every pastor on the planet would do that the exact same way. They would go to the very beginning of the book and they would say, I, Paul, to the saints which are at Ephesus. And I know the whole book is to them. I wouldn't say, well, just the first chapters to them. I know the purpose of Philippians is to the saints at Philippi. James to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. I can tell you what the book is by going to the beginning and what we call the introduction or salutation. And it tells you in the first 4 verses of Revelation, I know who wrote it. I know what purpose it was for. I know what time it was for. And I do know here that it's saying that it's written to 7 churches which are presently in the Roman-controlled province of Asia. And it's about things that are about to take place. The time is at hand. Let's go ahead and go to verses 7 through 9. Also, there's an emphasis on this book that it is concerning those who crucified our Lord. It says in verse 7, behold, he cometh with the clouds, every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him. All kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him, even so, amen. So we have this idea in verse 7 that those that crucified Jesus, there may still be some of them that are alive. They will see him. that pierced him. And if not them, then maybe we're talking about those that were eyewitnesses of the crucifixion. They saw the piercing of Christ. Verse number 9, John also says this in the present tense. I, John, who also am your companion in tribulation. So John is also experiencing persecution right now in the Roman Empire in verse number 9 that's presently happening at this writing. And we'll see that there's a reason that is a heavy evidence pre-destruction of the temple, pre-Titus coming in under the rule of Vespasian, his dad, and destroying the temple in AD 70. But there's also a bookend to this. Look at chapter 22. So there's the beginning. That's before the vision started. We're just using plain language. This is not vision prophetic language. This is plain language. What we call our epilogue starts in chapter 22 and verse 6. We're closing out the book. And the vision ends in verse number 5. As the vision ends in verse 5, the angel then looks back to John. And let's go ahead and look in verses 6 through 10. And he, that's the angel, said to me, these sayings are faithful and true. The Lord God, the holy prophet, sent his angel to show unto his servants things which must, here we go again, shortly be done. So we have these bookends. Before the vision starts, we're told these things are about to take place. They're right in front of us. Again, the bookend, as soon as the vision ends, verse 6, as soon as it ends, it's told, these things must shortly be done. Behold, I come quickly. There's the word quickly. And of course, we know what he means by come quickly. We're talking there about the coming of the Lord in the context of what we're talking about. We've already gone over this ad nauseum with Matthew 24. Coming in judgment, in the clouds, in judgment. I come quickly. Blessed is he that keep the sayings of the prophecy of this book. And I, John, when I saw these things, I heard them. And when I heard them and seen, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel which showed me these things. Then saith he unto me, see thou do it not, for I am thy fellow servant, and of thy brethren the prophets, and of them which keep the sayings of this book worship God. And he saith unto me, this is very important for our timing, he said, seal not the sayings of this book, for the time is at hand. Now we have let's do some biblical theology here, a Bible study. Where else do we hear an angel telling a biblical author about whether to seal words or not seal words? Well, it's the book of Daniel.
Daniel.
And
except he was told to seal it up.
You got it. And the reason for was because it was not close by. It's afar off. Now, if you go to Daniel and you read it, and the angel says to Daniel to seal up the words of this prophecy, he says, seal it up because it's afar off. And we know that those things took place 400 years later. So if Daniel's prophecy was told to be sealed, and those things took place 400 years later because they were afar off, and John here is told to not seal them because the time is at hand, I am safely in a Bible study to say these things will take place at least less than 400 years. And I would say they actually happened within about a year. Because if he was written in AD 65, these things started taking place in AD 66. So here is just the beginning. When we go through this book, I am doing the highlights for our 5 reasons. When we start going through the book of Revelation, we'll take the time when we get to individual verses, and I'll point out all the timestamps. For example, when we're talking to the 7 churches which are in Asia, present tense, John uses the second person plural pronoun when he says ye. When ye do this, when ye do that, this will happen. It's a book written to them. We have people all over the internet today, and pastors behind pulpits all over the place, that are teaching that these churches are church eras, that this is historically a different era, that they represent era. There's nothing in the Bible that would indicate anything like that. That is somebody's interpretation on it. But if you are doing biblical theology, meaning the exposition of the text in order of the verses, you would never come away with a theory of the churches being a certain age and represent. People say, oh, we're in the Laodicean church state. No, we're not. Our church may have, your church that you're in, or the church universally, may have certain characteristics of each church, or they may not. But we're not in the Laodicean church. That was in the 1st century, and that church is no more. And so there may be a church in Laodicea, but I'm just saying this particular church and the members of this church in the first century have all died off. We're not in any particular church. So,
and didn't John, I mean, he visited all those churches, right?
right. Yeah. Paul, anyway, in the
Well,
first century,
Paul
we'll get into,
probably started them all,
very good chance.
you know?
Very good chance. So grammatically, we'll get into, this is kind of like on par with, Matthew 24:34, and all these things will take place within this generation before this generation passes away. So grammatically, just the plain language of the Word of God itself, just grammatically, is one of our evidences of the internal date being before AD 70.
And there's even more than what you've said here. I mean,
Goodness,
and we'll be going through them when we get to chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 12. There's a whole bunch of
there's a bunch.
Yeah.
This is just meant to be highlights. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons I'm going to go light on these first is because I'm going to take a lot more time on especially 5. Number 2, canonical. Let me just touch on this real quickly. The entire biblical narrative, in other words, if you're to read it as a story, it all is one cohesive story with many chapters. Remember, we've talked about this before. This is a library of books. This is 66 books. By the way we count, the Hebrew Bible would make a lot of those books one book. For example, they don't have First and Second Kings. They would just have that. They would combine those. First, Second Samuel are combined. So, but for our purposes of what we're holding, we have 66 separate books, but they all flow with one story. In other words, I can be blessed by going to Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15 about seeing a prophecy that one day Messiah will come and crush the head of the serpent. I can be blessed to see that theme all the way through, even though one is in Genesis and the other one is in the Gospels. But I know that the whole thing runs together by one author. Now, if that's the case, then I should be able to see this in the book of Revelation as well. Revelation is a continuation of Matthew 23. If folks haven't seen our Matthew 23 video, I'd encourage you to pause this, go watch that. Understand that Jesus came and gave these 8 woes to the Pharisees. OIE, as you like to say. And he gave these woes to the Pharisees. And this is a continuation of that theme, that we're ending the old covenant. And if you're not safe, I mean, folks, just think about it. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem, God became a man, Emmanuel, God with us. And when Jesus came to the earth, those that are in him are safe. They're saved. They're in that salvation shelter. If you're outside of that, you're in a whole heap of trouble. And we've got a baton passing from old covenant to new. And Jesus came saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Believe in me, you'll have everlasting life. I mean, how much more clear could it be that the Gospels and the book of Acts are all about the idea of doing away with an old covenant and getting into a new covenant to be safe. Revelation is the climax of that, where we see those that are outside of the salvation shelter that refuse to humble themselves before Messiah the King are in some serious trouble. And if that's the case, we should see in Revelation something that resembles this. It should be the same argument. And in fact, that's what we see. Again, as you stated, there's a lot. Let's go to Revelation 11. Revelation 11 and verses 7 and 8 for our first passage. Revelation 11, 7 and 8. And when they have finished their testimony, we're talking about the 2 witnesses. We will get into explaining that when we do the video for verse by verse. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So we have here that Jerusalem is where our Lord was crucified. Jerusalem has turned into, spiritually speaking, Sodom and Egypt, 2 very, very bad examples of ungodliness out of covenant with God, known for pagan idolatry. And Israel, Jerusalem, has turned into this. Jerusalem, the center of where the temple is, the very housing of God's presence in the temple and the Holy of Holies, has turned into this empty, pagan-filled culture, empty of the Holy Spirit, pagan-filled culture that can only be described as looking right into the eyes of the Jewish apostates and saying, you guys have turned into Sodom and Egypt. And on a grander, broader scale, they've turned into what we call mystery Babylon. Israel's referred to as harlot over and over and over. And when we get into the passage, when we teach that, Jimmy, folks will be astonished at how many times in the Old Testament Israel has played the harlot, been the harlot. In fact, there's one prophecy that we'll get into where the prophet says to Israel that the Lord is saying, he looks up and down the highway and he says, is there anybody that way, or is there anybody that way that you haven't laid down with? And he even says to Israel, by the way, as far as prostitutes go, you're not even a good one, because at least they get paid, you get stolen from. So he's like, you're not even a good prostitute. So the term harlot, whore, and prostitute, that idea is all through, because they're cheating on God with pagan nations. And so they're given the idea of prostitute. That's what Hosea was about. Look at what Hosea was told to marry a harlot so that they could have a picture of God's faithfulness and forgiveness to them. Finally, he just divorces them. That's the story. So we should see that. So here we see they've turned into Egypt and Sodom and that sort of thing. Look again, if you would, in Revelation 17, verses 1 and 2. Revelation 17, 1 and 2. I'm just going to keep writing these on the board for a record here. Revelation 17, verses 1 and 2. John writes, and there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. I'll show you this in a little bit. The many waters is people, and it's talking about the nations. It's talking about Gentiles. So here we have the whore, which is Israel, is using it for mobility, sitting on the nations. That's the. And by the way, I'm trying to be. I don't even know what the word is. The Bible is very graphic. I'll just say that the Bible is a very graphic book, and I think sometimes we have tamed it down. You know, when people say I'm a godly conservative person, and I count myself among them, I want to be godly. I am conservative. I don't use foul language in my personal life. I don't do that. And so sometimes I almost clean up the biblical narrative because it's vulgar and I don't like talking that way. So I'll just say, folks, read verse 1 real slowly. Does it make any sense to sit on many waters? What is that talking about? If you have a harlot that's sitting on people, what does that mean? I'll let you all figure that out, okay? This is very graphic, though, and I wasn't going to say that, but I want people to understand the nature of what we're dealing with. And it says here, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So we have this canonical agreement that Israel was going to face judgment because of their adultery, spiritual adultery with the Lord. This harlot that's sitting upon many people, the nations. And that was said in Matthew 23, I'm going to destroy you guys. Matthew 21 at the end, we've talked about this already. I'm going to destroy you guys. The blood of righteous Abel, all the way to the blood of Zacharias, son of Berechiah, will come on this generation. You guys are going down. When did that happen? 66 to 70 AD. So we have the message of Revelation is the destruction of apostate Israel, also known as the harlot. When did that take place? Well, the temple being destroyed ended any hope that the apostate Jews had to re-infuse into society the Judaic age. The temple system was over, has never come back.
Well, even the Song of Moses, right, was all the curses that was going to come upon them. You can see every one of those in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple.
That's right.
According to historical books.
You know, the destruction of the temple is a big deal. It really ended let me say it this way, because people will say, but I still see Jews today. Folks, bear with me on the next 20 seconds. Don't cut me off here. The AD 70 ended the biblical Jewish religion. What took over after that in the Flavian dynasty is we see a recreation, and it is now rabbinical Judaism. Biblical Judaism has to follow the laws of Moses. Biblical Judaism has to have a temple. Biblical Judaism has a sacrificial system and a setup of a system within the Levitical priesthood. That's biblical Judaism. That hasn't happened, and they haven't even attempted it since
They're
after
trying to
AD
do
70.
it. They're trying to do it. They got those heifers ready.
Yeah, I just made a post today on my Facebook account. It just said, paraphrasing Hebrews 1:1-3, that God in these last days has spoken us onto his son. And I just paraphrased and said, not onto us by a cow, no matter the color, not onto us onto a cargo ship, no matter the name, and not onto us by an eclipse, no matter which cities it goes over. Don't try to look for signs. It's a wicked generation that looks for signs, Jesus said. Don't look for signs. It's a wicked generation that looks for signs. He gave one sign. It's the sign of Jonah. We've already gone over that. Listen to Jesus. Listen to Jesus. He's already spoken on these things.
He's pretty smart.
He's pretty smart. He got it right.
He's pretty smart.
So the canonical evidences show that indeed we've been talking about the destruction of Jerusalem for quite some time. It's come upon this generation. It happened right when Jesus said, we'll leave it at that. We'll add to this. When we go into the book, these will all pop out much, much more. I'm just giving an overview. Thirdly, architectural evidence. And that is found in Revelation 11 and verses 1 and 2. We're going to actually look through Revelation 11 quite a bit in this video. So by the time you get done, you'll have a fairly good grasp of Revelation 11 anyway. John said, and there was given me a reed like unto a rod. And the angel stood saying, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and them that worship therein. Now, let me just say this. This word, there's a couple different words for temple that's translated as temple. This word here in Revelation 11:1, the wording here is a reference to the Holy of Holies. It's the actual room that houses the presence of God. So this is like measuring that one room. And by the way, it's a cubed room. Okay, and I'll give you a little preview of our study. That cubed room, and the only other room that we see that houses the presence of the Lord post ascension is found in Revelation 21, which is the New Jerusalem. It's the same dimensions, but way bigger. It's because the temple that was in Jerusalem gets destroyed, but he goes and measures it, because if you measure something, measurement shows a couple things in the Bible. It shows ownership and plans for something. So if you wanted to remodel your house, Jimmy, it'd be very, very important that if you hired somebody, or you and I did it, and probably cost us more money and we'd mess up. But if you say, I like to think I'm handy, but it doesn't always turn out. But anyways, but if we were to hire somebody to come over and do some construction or remodel a room, you'd see them have their tape measure out, and they're doing that based on your authority. When you measure something, it's because you own it and you have plans for it. God here is measuring the inner, most important part of the temple called the Holy of Holies. Why? Because he's going to remake it. That's why. But here look at verse 2. But the court which is without the temple leave out. Measure it not. I have no plans for it. Why? Verse 2. For it is given unto the Gentiles. And the holy city, well, we know the holy city is Jerusalem. Holy city shall they tread underfoot. How long? 3.5 years, 40 and 2 months. So why wouldn't we measure this idea of the courtyard? Because the folks that are going to come in, that are going to destroy this, which is the Roman army, it's useless. It's empty. They're going to come in and destroy it. So I want people to notice architectural reasons. Folks, here's a really obvious point that I don't hear the late date folks saying. There's still a temple standing.
They'll say that he was measuring, that's the third temple that hasn't been built yet. That's still off in the future.
Yeah, people do say that, and there's a very, very important reason they say that, and that is because their bias has told them that this was written in AD 95, and so they're right. In AD 95, there is no temple, and so what temple are we talking about if we have a late date? So you can see the flimsiness of this argument. So they say, we must have another temple, although it doesn't say that.
That's why this episode is so important, and just doing even more study on the dating, because we were talking before, it does affect how you understand this book.
Yes, it does. And I, by the way, I forgot to say this earlier. I wanted to give a challenge to folks that are watching this. I believe, Jimmy, by this point, I think I saw in there our bigger videos. I think you said we've done 16 or something like that. This is 17, I believe. If people are still with us at this point, they are, I believe, interested in growing, and they're interested in what the Bible has to say. At least they want to know what our perspective is. So let me give a challenge to those that are watching this that are incredible. I believe you guys are incredibly sincere. So let me give you a challenge. Here's the challenge. I would challenge you that in the next week, you almost always, unless it'd be my fault if you don't, but you almost always release a new video on Wednesday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern time.
Yes.
Right? So people can look for that. So I would just give you this challenge, folks, as you're watching this. Try to read the book of Revelation, chapters 1 through 22. Read it through once every week. Once every week. And just get a bird's eye view. Just get it ingested in your system as we're reading this. What I have found is people that buy into bad ideas, they buy into them because people show them one verse way out of context. And the hard work we're doing is to try and show verses in context. That's why the videos are longer. So anyway, just a little challenge there. So architecturally, folks, understand this temple was still standing. If the temple's still standing. So this is the illustration I was going to give earlier. Jimmy, if this is something we're all familiar with. If you and I were to make a documentary, I know you're an awesome filmmaker, editor. If you and I were like, let's do a documentary on New York City. Okay. You and I are going to go to New York. We're going to live there for a few months. We're going to get all the oldest photographs we can find. We want to know everything. We want to know everything about France bringing over the Statue of Liberty. We want to know years. We want to get pictures of that being made. And we're going to go all the way up until present time New York, to today, to 2024. And we go all the way through and we get to 2001. And in 2001, we say nothing of any significance happened here. And we end our documentary. And it goes all the way up to 2000, and we say things that happened about how the Yankees did, how the Mets did, how the Giants did. And we're talking about all these things, and we end the documentary. We go, and that's our history of New York City. Can you think of any, I don't know, major global historic, history-changing event that happened in 2001? Now, if we did not put in the World Trade Center terrorist attack, we didn't talk about 9/11 in our documentary. Folks that are looking at it later can say one of two things. Either they did that documentary after 9/11 and they're the worst documentary guys ever because they left out the most significant event, or that documentary was made prior to 2001 and it hadn't happened yet. And that would obviously, if we're good at making documentaries, the obvious conclusion is, if we don't see anything after that, it was written before 2001. So what we're saying is in Revelation 11, 1 and 2, the temple's still standing. I can make a very obvious conclusion that this was written before the temple was destroyed. The other guys that want to have the late date, they say, well, because of the way they're already perceiving the book, they say, look, a third temple. Now, if you were convinced that I made our New York City documentary in 2005, sometime after the World Trade Center went down in 01, let's just say you were an advocate of an 05 date for our documentary. Okay. And it shows that the World Trade Center is still standing. They say, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. It got rebuilt. No, you would say if it's still standing and there's no word of its destruction, it's not it's not another one. It's the same one. That seems pretty obvious on the face of the reading. Somebody would have to teach you that that's not right.
Yeah.
If you show the World Trade Center still standing, you would not say, I bet they're wrong. This wasn't made in 2000. This was made in 2024. And what they're saying is it's remade. No, there's no word of its destruction. It's the original one standing. And that's what we see here in this passage. Not only that, but this kind of goes into canonical evidences. Let me go to Luke chapter 21 and verse 24. Luke chapter 21 and verse 24. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now turn back over, if you would, into Revelation 11. It says in Revelation 11:2, but the court which is without the temple leave out, measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles. The holy city shall they tread underfoot 40 and 2 months. So John is really using language from Luke chapter 21, saying exactly the same thing in slightly different wording, that the Gentiles are going to be the ones to come in and destroy the temple, and they're going to be the ones that are going to destroy this entire system. And Jesus said, not one stone is left upon another. Now, because this is a vision, folks might want to know, what's the point of this? Because this is a vision, the Lord is giving hope to Christians that are sealed with the Father, that win by the word of their testimony and by the blood of the Lamb. He's giving them hope that although the temple is destroyed, it's okay because I've measured it, verse 1. And if I've measured it, I can duplicate it. And in fact, we see his duplication of the mode of worship through the temple system by a new Jerusalem that's built. And this new Jerusalem is from heaven, and it's not made with hands, and it is indeed made up of believers. We are those living stones. Your name is no more Simon, but Petros, rock, Peter. Wow, is that a compliment? Yes. You're a stone in my new temple. That's what we are. We're living stones, built up as living stones. So the measurement here of the Holy of Holies is an indication that the physical one may be destroyed, but the schematics of it are recorded in heaven to be recreated. And that's the New Jerusalem coming down as adorned as a bride for her husband in Revelation 21. Now, the flip side of this, before we go to our next one, the flip side of this is, if indeed the Revelation was written in AD 95, then the question must be asked, what is this talking about? Because remember, we still have our plain language that these things are about to happen. So you can see that if you take the late date, it doesn't solve anything. It makes your life harder to interpret this, because the plain language of will shortly take place now shortly means 2,000 plus years. And you have to come up with a scenario where the Romans are now destroying the Jews in a temple. And of course, many people have come up with theories that there's a revitalization of the Roman Empire. And their proof of that is absolutely nothing other than they say, look, we still see a little property that the Vatican owns, and that's going to be the revived Roman Empire. None of that's in the Bible. And then they're going to build a third temple. So it makes more plain sense to say this nothing even close to this happened shortly after AD 95. So you have to invent a new temple, invent a new Roman Empire. You have to invent a lot of things and say, I just believe by faith that this will all happen in our future. The problem is, Jimmy, that's not a Bible study. That is a theory that you're imposing on specific proof texting individual segments. We're taking the whole thing as a story. Okay? All right, let's move on. So that's our architectural evidence. Now, I think these last two are pretty powerful. Let's go to our sociological evidence. There was a contentious relationship between the ungodly Jews and the Christians. After Jesus ascended in Acts chapter 1, we see in the book of Acts a time period somewhere between AD 30 and the destruction of the temple in AD 70. Probably pull off that, 3 or 4 years on the end there, and you have the book of Acts, those 28 chapters. It is the record of the unmeasurable, probably, growth of the church all the way through the Roman Empire. And there was a growing and growing and growing disdain for the old covenant Jews, unsaved Jews that want to keep the old covenant, that are still using the temple because it's still standing, and Christians who are saying, we don't even need the temple anymore. Jesus is our everything. He fulfills everything. We don't need it. Their relationship was in total turmoil. That relationship changed once the temple was destroyed and the Christians went all over the world. We see in Acts chapter 8 when Stephen is stoned. Remember Acts chapter 8 verse 1, their response to Stephen being stoned in Acts 7 is they got fearful. We looked at that before, and they went all over the world, and the Christianity exploded and went international. I don't need to go to Jerusalem anymore. The temple is empty. There's nothing in it. In fact, it'll be destroyed in AD 70. I can go internationally. I take the temple of God with me because I am a member of the body of Christ. I'm identified with him. I'm in him. He is my salvation shelter. Just like my kidneys belong to me, it's in my body. It's one member of my body, but it's all a part of me who makes me up. We're in the body of Christ. So we have this sociological contention that really was white hot prior to AD 70 that really started to taper off after the destruction of the temple. Let me show you a little bit of that. It gives us a sense of prior to AD 70. Let's go to Revelation 2 in verse number 9. I'm just going to look at two places for this one. Revelation 2:9. And just notice this wording here in 2:9. Now, this is a message that is written to the church of Smyrna. And we'll get into each one of these letters. You guys, I'm telling you, hang on. I know this video is technical. And in fact, if you're losing interest on this video, just go to our other stuff on the Revelation. It'll be so much fun when we get there. I know this is tedious to go through, but I got to do these evidences because people, they don't know when it was written. But look at verse 9. I know thy works in tribulation and poverty. Notice tribulation. Even when I was a dispensationalist, I thought that was written in the first century. And he's talking about tribulation there. And poverty, but thou art rich. And I know blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Now, who would claim to be Jews who weren't Jews? Well, this is easy. A Gentile would never want to claim they're a Jew. Why would a Gentile go around saying, I'm a Jew, and they have nothing to do with the Jews? No, these are people who are of the line of Abraham. And what they're saying is they're godly and in covenant with God, but they're not. This is the John chapter 8 stuff. When Jesus looks at them in John 8:44, and he makes that big argument that, yes, you're of the line of Abraham. Like Ancestry.com would say that you are connected to Abraham DNA-wise. But Jesus says, oh, but you're not the children of Abraham. He's talking covenantally. You're of your father, the devil. That's John 8:44. And this is what this is saying. John is communicating through the Lord. The Lord is saying that there are people who say they are Jews, but we know they're not in covenant. And he's saying that they are actually of another synagogue, and that's a synagogue of Satan. So they're getting this church, the church of Smyrna, is being persecuted. They're going through persecution by people who are saying, we're Jews, we're in covenant with God, we're of the line of Abraham. And he's saying to them, they're not in covenant with me, even though they may be of the line of Abraham. They're of another synagogue entirely. They're of a synagogue of Satan. Look over one chapter in 3:9. What's going to happen with these folks? We'll look at 3:9. This is to the church of Philadelphia. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, look at this, folks. I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. There is a coming humiliation of these folks who say that they are in covenant with God because of their line to Abraham. They will soon, it says here in verse number 9, I will make them come and worship before thy feet. They will soon be humbled, and they will lose their power to persecute. Shortly. We know that from Revelation 1. When will this happen? Shortly. The whole book's shortly. So this lends itself to an AD prior to the destruction of AD. This is AD 65, prior to AD 70 text. Those that are persecuting you, that say they are Jews but are not, they're of the synagogue of Satan, they will shortly be humbled. When did that happen? Oh my goodness. The Roman-Jewish War is when that happened. From 66 to 70 AD 70, there's 42 months of a severe persecution by the Romans onto the Jews. Severe. And so that is a humiliation. They lose their power. They lose their footing in society. Remember, all of the technical hierarchy that we see in the Gospels, like Nicodemus in John 3 coming to Jesus. He was a high up Pharisee. All those things don't matter after AD 70. Socially, you're going to go and say, I am a high ranking Pharisee. Who cares, man? It would be like right now, if the White House, or I don't want to say specific, but if something that is for an American, a Capitol or something is bulldozed over, and you see somebody that you normally see on TV that's a high ranking official, but there is no more America, and you see Nancy Pelosi out there, she goes, listen to me, I am Nancy Pelosi. Who cares? There's no office. You don't have a home. Our cars are on fire. Your rank really kind of lost it when the White House got destroyed. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so these folks.
It does, but who cares who she is anyway, even now?
That's why I picked her. I knew I was safe with picking her. But this is the point. If I said soon these folks would be humbled, this fits much better with a Jewish-Roman war culminating in AD 70. Okay, so that's just the sociological internal evidence. Again, you have to put yourself in context of a AD 95 argument and say, what sense does that make? So all this stuff is over and done with, and I'm all the way towards the end of the reign of Domitian. All these things have happened. The Flavian dynasty is almost over, and then we're writing this. No wonder futurists are confused, because my goodness, it's all up for grabs. What does this mean? I don't know. Let me write a book and get rich. I could be like David Jeremiah, and I could warn everybody about everything. And they could say, Ken, how do you know? I don't know. I'm just, man, this could be the mark of the beast. And oh my goodness, look over here. This very well is the rise of the red heifer. And oh, look, the temple's getting ready. I could say anything about anything, and people because there's nothing to base it on. If this is future, it has not happened yet. I could say anything.
It still baffles me that so many Christians who believe this way are rooting for this to happen, and they love Israel and all this, but they're forgetting that most of them get killed during this time.
2/3, folks.
2/3. And
2/3.
It just baffles me that we're rooting for that.
Unbelievable. Yeah, unbelievable. Let me go ahead and go one more with the sociological, and let's go to Revelation 17. And let's do a little Bible. I would rather just have some fun with the Bible, but Revelation 17. Now, we've already done a lot of this book, so I'd like, if it's okay with folks, let's just take a moment and read through this. And I want to show you a couple things, because it's actually quite fascinating. When you know a little bit more and you're reading this and it makes sense, you go, I can't believe this makes sense. Look at verse 1. Let's just read a little bit, if that's all right. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, I'll show thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Verse 3. So he carried me away into the spirit into the wilderness. I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of fornication. Upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. Let me just jump in real quick and say this. When we see a name written on foreheads in the Bible, it shows ownership. So earlier in the book of Revelation, we see the seal of the Father on the forehead of those that are sealed with the Father. And I always wonder why people who are obsessed with what the mark of the beast is seem to not care at all what the mark of the Father is. Those are juxtaposed to each other. You either are sealed by the Father, or you have this. And by the way, the word mark here is the word etching. But I don't know honestly, Jimmy, I don't know what people are thinking when they hear the word seal, but I'll tell you what it is. I don't know if they think of like a glue or what, but it's not a seal like you're sealing a container.
I know what I think of.
Please.
Like branded almost. You know how they
Yes,
hot something branded on you, seal. You're sealed.
you're very close, except for I'd add one thing. And a seal is a wax seal. It's a signet. It's a royalty idea of a king's ring. Many times he would drip wax and he'd say, "I did this."
Which is what
That
they
seal is
did back then, right?
exactly right. It's how they would verify things. They'd have a very specific signet. We talked about that last time. That one of the signs of the Roman Empire was an eagle. People can check that out. But this seal of the Father is this royalty. Jesus is our royal leader. He's our king. We're transferring. Remember what the crowd said? We have no king but Caesar. Okay. Well, and by the way, if they were saying that, then they would have been talking about Tiberius. We'll get into that in a second. But this is a seal of the king signet. So you're either with King Jesus or you're with the Roman Empire. You're sealed by one or you're sealed by the other. This isn't really that hard. And here we see the woman is this harlot, and she has indeed, verse 6, the woman drunken with the blood of the saints. Can't get enough of this killing of Christians, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. Verse 7, the angel said unto me, wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and the beast that carried her, and of the 7 heads and 10 horns. Oh, goody. I don't have to guess. Right here, we have an interpretation of these things. So it says here in verse number 8, the beast that thou sawest was and is not, shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition, that dwell on the earth, and shall wonder whose names were written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they beheld the beast that was and is not and yet is. Now, we're going to take just a moment because these kind of tie in with each other. But let me just say this, because we're about to go to historical. Let me just say this. Let's jump down to, and then I'm going to come back and fill the rest of these in. Verse 15. He saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are people, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And we get into other things here. Let me just say this. Sociological, to finish off this point. We're going to stay in Revelation 17 for this. But to finish off sociological, the woman, we know who that is. That is a city. That's Jerusalem. And we know that it is the holy city of God. Let me see really quick here. Verse 18, it says that. The woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. And we know from earlier passages that that's Jerusalem. The great city is always referred to as Jerusalem. So we know the woman is Jerusalem. We know that, and specifically what it represents, the temple and those that are out of covenant. We know the beast is the Roman Empire. I will take a lot of time to show that when we go through these verse by verse. And the water here is people and nations. So we have here, if I can say it this way, the people who are obsessed with the temple system, out of covenant Jews, are prostituting themselves, getting drunk or controlled by the martyrs of Jesus, and they are sitting on and riding the beast. And so we have here apostate Jews using the Roman Empire for their purposes. Remember, every time they wanted to tell on Jesus, we see this in the Gospels. We see this under Tiberius. Almost everything that happened in the Gospels, Tiberius is the one to remember. So they're going to the Roman officials under Tiberius ultimately, and they're wanting them to see things about Jesus. They're telling on Jesus in a political way that will get him in trouble with the Romans. It's such an obvious theme throughout the Gospels. And so in this sense, they are riding on or using the Roman Empire to fulfill their purposes of the destruction of what they see as an enemy of God and an ending of the old covenant. They're protecting the old covenant, and they hate Jesus for starting this movement of a new covenant. They hate his followers for saying they don't need an old covenant, don't have to follow the law of Moses, and they're going, this can't happen. We have to kill these people and stop and cut the head of the snake off. Okay? So we have all that in Revelation 17. So we're going to close sociological. We see this is basically talking about the contention that does not make sense after AD 70 of people who are apostate Israelites and the Christians, because it greatly changed after the destruction of the temple. I'm going to go to historical, and we're still going to be in Revelation 17. Now, before we read our next passage in Revelation 17 on historical, I've got to give, this is the last thing we're doing. So folks, if you're with us, you are amazing. Thank you for your patience. You guys are great. I know this is, this is academic, but let's teach through a few things here. There is a Roman historian named Suetonius, and Suetonius in 121. So we're in AD. So I don't, we're this far in AD 121. And he wrote a book called The 12 Caesars. And in Suetonius's book, he starts with Julius. So this is a very, very common place to start when we're talking about these. But we have Julius starting at 44 BC to 27 BC. He's taken over by Augustus in 27 BC to AD 14. So you see, he reigned for quite a while, especially for a Roman emperor. Tiberius took over in 14 and went all the way to 37. Now, of course, Jesus and his ministry, his public ministry, was from 27 AD to 30 AD, AD 27 to AD 30. So we see Tiberius is the guy. So whenever we read the Gospels and we're talking about a taxation or we're talking about anything that's going on in the Gospels would be under the rule and reign of Tiberius. All right. He's taken over by Caligula in 37. He reigns for 4 years. Caligula is taken over. So now we're getting into the book of Acts. So the book of Acts is starting in 30. So Tiberius is the first 7 years of Acts, and then Caligula takes over. We see Claudius in 41 to 54 right there. He's taken over by Nero, one of the names we're familiar with, Nero. And he's 54 to 68. He kills himself in 68. Let's just stop there for a moment. Now let's go ahead and read Revelation chapter 17. And first of all, I'm going to ask you some trivia here, Jimmy, while we're getting started here. So let's do some trivia. If I were to say to you, name the city that is known as the Big Apple.
New York.
Do you know what that is? New York City. What if I were to ask you, what is the name of the city that's known as the Windy City?
That would be Chicago.
Chicagoans. What about the Motor City?
Detroit.
And here's where I'm from. What about the Emerald City?
Well, since I know you're from Seattle,
put it together.
I don't think I would have guessed that one.
It's a little bit lesser known, I guess. That's the Emerald City. If you were alive in the days of Suetonius, 1st century, 2nd century, around in that time, and I were to ask you this, and we'd play this exact same game, and I were to say, what is the city of the 7 hills? Just as much as everybody knows the Big Apple is New York, everybody would say Rome. And in fact, right now, if you type in and just do a quick Google search, the city of 7 hills, it'll come up Rome still. So 2,000 years later, that's still a nickname that everybody knows it by. Let's go ahead and read in Revelation 17. Let's go to 9 and 10. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads, remember he said he's going to give the interpretation. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. So this is even clearer. The nickname that we have today is the city on 7 hills. The 7 mountains are the 7 mountains that are the establishments of the 7 hills of Rome. Here's what they are so people can look them up. But you have Palatine, Aventine, Capitoline, Caelian, Escaline, Viminal, and Quirinal. And you could look at all of those, and those are all the each one of those had a Roman establishment in them, and that was what they were known as the city on 7 hills. So it says here in verse 10, let's look at this. There are 7 kings, it says here. 5 are fallen, that is, died. 1 is, and the other is not yet come. So we have to go back to our chart here. So starting with the most common listing, Julius is number 1, Augustus 2, Tiberius 3, Caligula 4, taken over by Claudius 5. Let me use a different color so it sticks out a little bit. 5 have died, they've fallen. And then look what it says after that. And 1 is. There's the one that is alive right now. Then it says, And the other is not yet come. Here's the other that's not yet come, Galba. Now, here's what's interesting, Jimmy. Nero, the sixth one that says and one is, would have been alive at the time period that we're suggesting, AD 65. Now, but wait, there's more. When Nero killed himself in 68, it started what is commonly known as the Year of Four Emperors. It was a civil war in Rome. In fact, it was so much so that our historians say things like, we thought it was the end of the world. They viewed it as the end of the world. Rome was on fire in AD 69. And we can't go over this too quickly for our dating here. In AD 68, Nero kills himself. And around December, Galba takes over, and he's done early January, probably January 14th or 15th. He only reigned for 2 months, the shortest of any emperor. This kicks us off with the Year of Four Emperors right here. These four, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian, are the Year of Four Emperors, and they all ruled within AD 69, a civil war in Rome, and Rome was on fire. Most people thought it was going to be the end of the world. But check this out. You have Galba reign for 2 months, Otho for 3 months, Vitellius for 8 months, and then, of course, they get a lot of this ends. The Year of the Four Emperors ends with Vespasian, and he really brings a lot of calmness, if you can say it that way, to the Roman Empire, gives it stability, and he goes all the way until 79. And so he brings stability back to the empire. Unfortunately for the world, he's extremely ungodly, and he's got a very, very ungodly son named Titus. And you can see right here that he took over the campaign in the Roman-Jewish War, which was 66 to 70. He took over the campaign in 69 and said, that's it, it's over. And he gave over the Jerusalem area, the Judean area, he gave it to his son Titus, who was not yet an emperor, but his son Titus, who did rule after his dad died 9 years after the destruction of the temple. But he did give it to Titus, and Titus is the one, under the authority of his father, came in and destroyed Jerusalem, leveled it, and ended everything in AD 70. But there's a little clue here. Galba reigned for 2 months, our first of the Year of the Four Emperors. Look at what your Bible says here in Revelation 17 and verse 10. It says there are 7 kings. So this particular prophecy that we're going over, this prophecy here includes 7 kings. Let me just highlight 7 kings. So this prophecy is about 7 kings. 5 have died, 1 is, and the other is yet to come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. What he's saying is, when Galba comes, when he does come, it's not going to be like what you're used to. It's not going to be another Nero. He's only going to come for a short time. What an incredibly detailed prophecy. This we know from history under our historical setting. This is such a detailed prophecy because Galba indeed did come after Nero. And when he came, he was the shortest reigning emperor of all time, only 2 months. And it says right here that 5 have died, 1 is, and the other one's yet to come, and he'll just come for a short time. This fits perfectly with our AD 65 early date writing. Let me show you one other thing in this. So let me go to, that was Revelation 17, 9 and 10. So we have Revelation 17. We're going to do one more proof to finish off the video here. And that is going to be found, we're going to look at the mark of the beast a little bit. And that is found in 13:18. 13:18. So 13:18, John writes, "Here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man." I wish folks could really hear that and repeat that 10 times so they could really get it in their head. When we're talking about the mark of the beast, it's the number of a man, not fill in the blank. It's been said so many things.
Or
not a barcode.
Or it's the number of man. mankind or something.
Yeah,
I've heard
yeah, yeah,
everything.
yes. And here it says very clearly, it's
God
the
made man
number.
on the sixth day, by the way. So
He did make man on the
6.
sixth day. That's right. That's right. It is the number of a man. A man. And here's the number. And by the way, let me also point out two things. Not only is it the number of a man, but the number is not 666. The number is 666. Because a lot of times when people are getting into this sort of prophecy stuff, you'll see this a lot. You'll see this is the mark of the beast. That's not the mark of the beast. It is not 3 individual sixes. That's not what it is. It is 666. I feel like, I was a third grade teacher for a bit, and when you're teaching those kids place values, it's like this has a certain value. It might be the number 6, but if it's over in this column, it's now 600 in value. The number is not 3 individual sixes, like a single unit of 6 and another single unit of 6. This is the goofy stuff when you don't see these things. Like I've said before, people thought it was Ronald Wilson Reagan because it was 6 letters, 6 letters, 6 letters. Maybe that's it, or, whatever. Nancy was sure into astrology, so I guess people can have fun figuring that out. But that's not the number. The number is not 666. It's 666. That's what it says. It says right here, and his number is 600, 6. So what does this mean? Well, this is actually pretty genius on John's part. Notice a couple things. One is he says, those of you who are wise, those of you who are learned, here is wisdom. And he says, let him that hath understanding. So understanding in what? He expects somebody of some kind of an understanding to be able to take this code, 666, and be able to identify a person. Well, what numbering system identifies a person? Well, this is the genius of this thing. As the Romans would no doubt be able to read, those who could read, there's a very, very high level of illiteracy in the first century, but those who could read would no doubt be able to read Greek. But the Romans who were coming in, especially those under the invasion of Vespasian with his son Titus, they more than likely would be very, very, Hebrew would be very foreign to them. So this is what's genius about this. If you take this idea of a numbering system, for those who are interested in this, by the way, just give a little quick shout out on this. On our current series we have for True Grace, the church that I pastor, we're going over Psalm 119. Psalm 119 is broken up into a series of Hebrew letters, like verses 1 through 8 are Aleph, and it goes every 8, it goes into a different one. So 22 times 8. That's the verses in Psalm 119. Basically, here is what's called gematria. Gematria is like this is Aleph right here. This is the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet. It has a numerical value of 1. The next letter is Bet. It has a numerical value of 2. And it keeps going like that until you get to 10, and then it starts jumping by tens, and then eventually goes by hundreds. So there is a numerical value. This is called gematria. It's nothing weird. This is a normal thing. The Hebrew language has a numbering system with a corresponding number, and it also has a corresponding pictogram which conveys an idea. Like, for example, Aleph, which is this, has a numerical value of 1. It also has a symbol like this. It's an ox head, and it means strong one or leader. And all of the letters convey an idea. So even within a word, you have an idea of how each letter is broken down. It's important to understand gematria. This is just simply called gematria with our numbering system, because John was giving instructions to those who know about gematria, that is the Hebrew letter equivalent of something. And he's expressing something. He's like, hey, wink, wink. If you know wisdom, if you know how to do a numbering system, you can figure out who this is. Now, if you're reading that in Greek, it doesn't translate. So the Romans who may get a hold of this letter with all these 7 churches in Turkey Minor, that would not help them because they wouldn't understand it because they don't have that system in Greek. It wouldn't match up. But if a Hebrew speaker was reading Greek, they would be able to play around with that and know. Well, obviously, Jimmy, if we're right in when this is written, which I'm very sure that we are, there's only really one person at the time that would be the prime candidate for this incredibly beast-like man. Beast in the Bible is a nation. We'll go over that when we get into the book. He's the head of the Roman Empire, so he's the most likely candidate. Now, I want to just draw on the board. in the Hebrew, I'm gonna erase some of this, so hopefully people have written this down. But let me just get rid of this part. Now, in the Hebrew, if we were to take the Hebrew, I'll do this quickly because I don't want to make this part too long. But basically, if you were to say this is how you put an N on it, but they would just pronounce it slightly different. So if you were doing this in Hebrew, that's how you would say Nero Caesar in Hebrew. I'm transliterating it. And the way that you would do that in Hebrew is they write right to left. So we're going to do Neron first. And it is this. That's noon. Resh. I'm just making sure that I have it right. There's a vav there and then another noon. That is Neron. Kaiser is going to start with what's called a kof. And then a samek, which basically is rounded and then like a hard square there on the end, and then another resh. Now, this says Neron Kaiser, okay, or Nero Caesar, how they would do it in Hebrew. Now, I'm going to give you the corresponding gematria numbers. I know this is just so fun, isn't it? So let's go. Noon is 50. That's 50. Resh is 200. Vav is 6. I know we've already done that letter in our study for Hebrew, in our Psalm 19, and then noon again is 50. So Neron is 50, 200, 6, and 50. Of course, that adds up to 306 for Neron. Now we get to Kaiser, and it starts with what's called a kof, our K sound, and a kof is worth 100 in gematria. Samek, which is our next one in that, is worth 60. And of course, we end with a resh, which we've already seen is 200. So you have kof, samek, and resh. Of course, that adds up to 360. If you add these together, you're going to get 666. So Neron Kaiser in the Hebrew, which is what Nero Caesar would be, in gematria, which is very common. It's a common thing. They did it all the time. If you just go watch our video on Psalm 119, you'll see how these numbers are just, they're beautiful. It makes the Bible like 3D. And this would give a very good evidence of this indeed being the number that you would identify with if you want to buy and sell. Is you have to buy into the Roman system. It means that you're buying into the leadership of Nero. It means that you're identifying with him in thought, forehead, and actions. Right hand is always the place of strong action. So you would take the mark or an identification with the beast, or in this case, Nero, in both the way you think and the way you act if you want to be a part of his system. And if you don't agree with that, then you're not going to be able to buy or sell. It's pretty simple, actually. You just kind of think of it in those terms. Okay, so that's a lot of detail. That's going to end our historic proofs. And I'll just say that for now, for our internal evidences, I think we're making a case that internally, Revelation can be written in AD 65 from grammatical, the plain language of the text, canonical reasons, that it matches everything else within the Bible. For architectural reasons, the temple is still standing. There's more we could get into in that. For sociological reasons, the contention between the apostate Jews and the Christians. And for historical reasons, we know for sure when Nero took over. We know 5 were dead, 1's alive, 1's coming. He's the shortest reigning one. We also know that John expected his first century audience to know who the man was that the number 666 represented. It's a bullseye for Nero. And so that's going to conclude our internal evidences, which we will expand on much, much more than this as we go through our study. But that brings us to the part of our video that I'm going to give now external evidences. Don't worry, the video is not going to be doubled in size. Of course, you know that if you're watching. But because it's short, because there's not much, because it's weak. And I'm going to give the external evidence now. I guess if you're doing a fair evidence, you shouldn't say it's weak. So let me be fair and say, now I'm going to give the external evidences. The external evidence is, in fact, I'm going to give the primary source. Now, you could take quotations from this and go up. I'm going to give you the root, the primary source that everybody quotes, okay? It's a quote from Irenaeus. Some people say Irenaeus. But there's a church father named Irenaeus, and Irenaeus, however you want to say it. He wrote a book called Against Heresies. The book has tremendous value. He was really arguing against the Gnostics, and I think there was a lot of value in what he was writing. But in Against Heresies, Irenaeus, in book 5, you guys, these are free resources. You can look them up right now. Just go ahead and go to a search engine and look up Against Heresies, book 5, chapter 30. In book 5, chapter 30, I'm going to give you the quote that is pulled, I think, out of context. And this is the pinnacle, zenith. It doesn't get any better than this. If you want to have an AD 95 writing for Revelation, you can forget about everything on the board right now. Here's your proof, AD 95. In Against Heresies, book 5, chapter 30, in section 3, Irenaeus said this: "We will not," and in fact, it's funny, we just went over this because he's talking about the identification of the mark of the beast, of who it is. He said, "We will not, however, incur the risk of pronouncing positively as to the name of Antichrist." He calls beast Antichrist, which I think is very confusing and whatever. But if it were necessary that his name should be distinctly revealed in this present time, it would have been announced by him who beheld the apocalyptic vision. For blank, I'll explain that in a second, was seen no very long time since, but almost in our day, towards the end of Domitian's reign. Now, that blank that I put on my quote, it can be filled by three options for the pronouns, depending on how you interpret this. And it is an interpretation, because I can see the Greek word that they translated into English. And the Greek word, if you put it into Google Translate, even right now, it just comes up with was seen. The Greek word is literally translated was seen. So it literally reads for was seen. Now in Greek, it would be understood that there is a pronoun to explain what was seen. And you have three options. It could be he, it could be it, or it could be that. It's almost always translated as it. And here's how it reads. I know this is getting a little technical, but what he's saying is, hey, if we were supposed to know the name of the Antichrist, we could have just asked John, because he's the one that saw the vision. And here's how it would read. First option for the late date. For it, that is the vision, for it was seen no very long time since, but almost in our day, towards the end of Domitian's reign. Towards the end of Domitian's reign was in 96. So they would say, it was the vision, and it was seen in AD 95. Bingo, late date. And this is the number one proof. Number one, and it's not even close, because the other proofs all start quoting off of Irenaeus. So when Eusebius starts quoting, he's quoting and assuming this quote to be it as in the vision, and it just got ran with traditionally. So a bunch of people started quoting it. But this is the root quote from Irenaeus, okay? Now let's talk about this. It's up to the interpretation. In fact, I have, I don't want to make this video any longer than it needs to be. But I have examples, if people are interested, of other books of antiquity that have taken this singular Greek word and have translated he was seen, okay? So it can be translated he, it, or that. Now those, if you look it up on the internet right now, will almost across the board say it was seen. But you just need to know that they're adding that pronoun. Now, I think it was more plausibly to be understood as he was seen. Now, again, folks, we are dealing with the only, best and only proof of a late date is right here. And it's not even close to clear. In fact, I think they're actually wrong about this one. But even if Irenaeus was arguing that he wrote it at the end of Domitian's reign, even if he's arguing that, does that overturn all of the internal evidence? I don't think so. This is just one man making a quote. Irenaeus also, people have said that he said that Jesus lived until he was 50 years old. So we're not saying he was right about everything, okay? But let me put this in context for those that want to go deep on this, okay? Here's what he said in book 5, chapter 30.1. So same section. I'm going to read one to you, because the only way we're going to be able to interpret that right is context. Was he talking about he as in John lived at the end of Domitian's reign? Or was it as in the vision was seen? Was John seen a little while ago at the end of Domitian's reign? Or did John see the vision a little while ago? So is it or is it he? Yes, folks, it is this technical. And this is their best argument. Let me read in context, and then you can make a decision. Number one, here's what he says. Now, I don't care about the content. I just want to know what he's talking about. Number one says this: such then being the state of the case, as this number being found in all the most approved and ancient copies of the Apocalypse. So in number one, so these are like separated by paragraphs, basically, or sentences sometimes. But in number one, his first thought is that the Apocalypse, meaning the book of Revelation, he refers to it as ancient antiquities. He says they have ancient copies. So just keep that in mind. When Irenaeus is talking about the book of Revelation itself, for sure, nobody's doubting this, he calls them ancient copies, okay? Those men who saw John face to face bearing their testimony to it, that is the ancient copies of Revelation. Then in 3, he says this, and this is the one I've already quoted. We will not, however, incur the risk of pronouncing positively as to the name of the Antichrist. For if it were necessary that his name should be distinctly revealed in this present time, it would have been revealed by him, personal pronoun, talking about John, by him who beheld the apocalyptic vision. For, I think, he was seen no very long time since, but almost in our day towards the end of Domitian's reign. One last one, verse 4.4, it says, but he's talking about John there. He indicates the number of the name now, that when this man comes, we may avoid him. Speaking of the Antichrist, being aware who he is. The name, however, is suppressed because it is not worthy of being proclaimed by the Holy Spirit. For if it had been declared by him, speaking of John, he, the Antichrist, might perhaps continue for a long period of time. I know that's a lot of wording, but my point is this. In context, Irenaeus is saying he on both sides of point 3. He's saying he for John. John is clearly the he here in point 1 and 4. So I have a lot of strength in that to say that in number 3, it should be translated as he. Okay? I know it's a lot of talking.
So in fairness to Irenaeus, he might not have believed in the AD 95 thing.
I don't think he did at all.
He was just merely stating, we saw John not too many years ago.
And if he's saying, what sense would it make? Let me just say this. What sense would it make to name the ancient copies of the book of Revelation as ancient copies, and then 2 paragraphs later say, these ancient copies, we just saw them not too long ago? That doesn't make sense. But what does make sense is to call them ancient copies if they were written in AD 65, and then to say, by the way, we just saw John not that long ago at the end of Domitian's reign, to make the distinction between a long time ago and not long ago.
Yeah, because he might have had a copy of the ancient copies right there in front of him when he was saying this.
I'm sure he did. And by the way, just so people know, to add one more layer to this thing, if people are going to get real nerdy with me on this, and I encourage you to, I'm nerdy too, it's not a knock. If you want to get real nerdy on this, go look at Eusebius's quote of Irenaeus, and keep in mind, Eusebius was not fond of Revelation at all. And so keep that in mind as you're reading Eusebius. He thought it was not scripture. Let me give you 2 final arguments for this interpretation that folks can think through. Either Irenaeus was saying that the vision was seen not long ago, or he was saying John was seen not that long ago. Now, let me give you those 2 options. What makes more sense to you, dear viewer? What makes more sense to you? Number 1, that he says either John would have, I'm paraphrasing to make the point, John would have told us, after all, he was alive not long ago, almost in our day, in the reign of Domitian. So if he wants to know the identity of the Antichrist, he could have said, number 1, John would have told us he was seen not that long ago at the end of Domitian's reign. Or does it make more sense that he says this? Number 2, John would have told us, after all, his vision was seen not that long ago at the end of Domitian's reign. That doesn't make as much sense. In context of all that Irenaeus is saying, I think it makes far more sense to say John wrote of ancient copies the vision. And by the way, he was seen not that long ago. He died almost in our day at the end of Domitian's reign. To me, that makes more sense. But let's just cut to the chase and say this. Let's just say Irenaeus slam dunk, without question, claimed that the vision of the apocalypse was written at the end of Domitian's reign, and let's just call it AD 95. Let's just say no doubt. I think there's a major doubt that's what he said. I don't think that's what he said. But let's just give it to them that is no doubt what he said. Then here's what the viewers need to determine if they're still trying to decide this. What do you care more about? A quote from a church father, which isn't very clear, but let's just say that you think it is. What do you care more about? A quote from a church father, or an early Christian, we could say, or the internal evidence that we've gone over? Which one holds more weight to, dear Christian, dear Bible reader? Which one do you care more about? What the Bible actually states, called internal evidence of the actual text, or should we then prioritize a quote that somebody made about the text? I prioritize the text. I am a Bible believing Christian. I love internal evidence over what somebody else said about the text. So those are the two views. And I'm not shortcutting the external view. That is literally their number one reason. And if somebody wants to argue with that, I'd be happy to go back and forth. I don't want to misrepresent it. But I will say that all the arguments for the external start with Irenaeus, and then they are quoting him. So that would be the difference between internal and external.
And for those of you who would really like to dive deeper into all of these evidences, internal and external, let me suggest this book here, Before Jerusalem Fell by Kenneth Gentry. I found this book 2 or 3 years ago, and that's kind of what started me down this journey. Because when he was going for his PhD, this was what he had to write as his, what did you call it, a doctoral thesis?
Dissertation. Yeah.
So years of research.
Years of research.
You know what that's like, Ken.
Yeah, I start my dissertation probably in about 6 months. So yeah, they take a long time.
Well, I mean, Ken, this is great to get us started, and thank you. I know you put a lot of work into finding all this stuff out as well.
Yeah, people have heard me say it so many times, but I always assumed the late date was the only date. Growing up, I always heard that in Bible college. All I ever heard was AD 95.
I didn't know there was dating on it. I thought everybody just agreed, and that's just the way it was.
That's what I always thought too. And that allows me I'll say this going into our Revelation study. I said this to our church. My goal of our Revelation study for our viewers and those that are studying with us, Jimmy, my goal is very simple. I would like for people to place the book of Revelation back in their Bible. What I mean by that is, if you look at charts about Revelation, it's always over by itself and it just says prophecy. You have Gospels, historical books in Acts, Pauline letters, prison epistles, and you have these other epistles over here, and then Revelation's off on an island by itself, and it just says prophecy. And what we do,
it's on the Isle of Patmos.
It's on the Isle of Patmos, just a 3-hour tour, right?
Yeah,
just doing an island joke. But if it's over by itself as an island, then I can. This is the trick, and I want people to see this. Then I, as a Bible teacher, because it's off by itself, and there's no other book like this, I can now attribute my own rules of interpretation on that one book. What I'm saying is, for biblical theology, I want to make Revelation part of your Bible again. In other words, I think that we should use the same rules of interpretation for Revelation as you did the other 65 books. And if you do that, you come away with kind of an easy to understand book. It's really not that difficult. There's a lot of details. There's a lot of callbacks, and we're going to certainly look and overturn some stones. But if you just simply say, I can interpret the 66th book the same way I did 65 in a row, you're going to be fine. It's when somebody says, no, that's a different sort of book. So we're going to recreate rules of interpretation for just that one. So my goal in our study would be for people to see the book of Revelation as a part of their Bible and interpret it the way we do everything else.